All right, thank you. Now we're ready to start our next session. I'm going to ask our next moderator, Christianna, to start us off. Take it away.
Thank you, Deborah. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Aligning Resilient Solutions with Decarbonization Goals session of the AABE-NYMAC Virtual Energy Summit. I am Christianna Ambo-Jones. As Deborah introduced, I am a department manager with Con Edison's Customer Clean Energy Solutions Group. Today, I will be moderating the panel discussion. We will have about an hour of discussion and then some minutes at the end for you guys to have your own questions. First, let me introduce you guys to the panelists, and then they will each briefly introduce themselves, and then we can get started. So on our panel today, we have Shaun Hoyte, who is a section manager of Clean Energy Networks at Con Ed. We have James Misewich, he's Associate Laboratory Director for Energy and Photon Sciences at Brookhaven National Laboratory. And we have Jaime Marcotte, Assistant Director of Clean and Resilient Buildings of NYSERDA. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Could you just briefly introduce yourself? We can start with Shaun.
Hey, good to see you, Chrissy. Shaun Hoyte. I lead our Clean Energy Networks group in Con Edison. And what that's comprised of at the center is industry partnerships and then surrounded by networks. So we have our Trade Ally network, which is comprised of participating contractors, manufacturers, distributors, and the like. We have our Tech Advancement Network that looks at technologies that are proven in other parts of the nation and the world, but not widely adopted here in New York City. So we provide a path, an on-ramp for them to meet the market here. Then we have our Financing Ally Network, which bridges the delta between our financial incentives and the upfront capital costs that customers will need to provide to implement some of the technologies that we're hoping that they adopt. And then we have Training and Education, which is centered around workforce development and creating career paths for individuals looking to be part of the clean energy transition. Outside of that, I'm an electrician by training, been at Con Ed almost 18 years now, and looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Shaun. Would you like to go, Jaime?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jim Misewich. I'm an associate laboratory director at Brookhaven National Lab. We are the multipurpose national laboratory in the Northeast, and we're located out here on Long Island. We're a very big laboratory with a rich history, 7 Nobel Prizes, etc. But let me tell you a little bit about what I'm involved with. My part of Brookhaven is called Energy and Photon Sciences, and what we do out here is we apply our capabilities and expertise to address some of the fundamental problems that we see facing the energy security issues of the country, including transitioning, decarbonization, transitioning to renewables, etc. So in order to do that, we have a number of remarkable capabilities out here. In my organization, we have the National Synchrotron Light Source 2, which is a $1 billion plus facility that generates X-rays. And we use those X-rays for all sorts of material studies, including, for example, we look inside batteries while they're working to help understand how we make better batteries for some of our, in particular, we're interested in grid scale applications. We also have one of the 5 national nanoscience centers out here where we're looking at new materials for the needs of the energy industry going forward, from catalysts to electrochemistry type of things to microelectronics, which is a big part of our energy consumption, by the way. And then we have programs in condensed matter physics, chemistry, material science, and applied energy. And finally, we have, which is of growing interest to the utilities, we have one of the 5 national quantum information science centers out here, where we're trying to apply to improve quantum computing and see how that can be applicable to improving both the quality and security of communication and computation for the broad community, including there's actually a lot of utility interest in that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, James. And we have Jaime.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. We're a public benefit corporation founded back in 1975. We deliver objective information and analysis, innovative programs, and technical expertise to the market to help New Yorkers increase their energy efficiency, reduce reliance on fossil fuels, and use renewable energy. I've been at NYSERDA now about 23 years. My focus is on clean and resilient buildings in the existing building space of New York State, primarily offering technical assistance programs and demonstration programs to showcase replicable, scalable demonstrations of clean energy improvements in buildings. And happy to be here today.
Thank you all. All right, so we'll jump right in. And as I ask the questions, feel free to chime in and follow up. What are some common trade-offs faced by building owners and grid operators who must ensure energy resilience while also striving to achieve decarbonization goals?
Yeah, I'll take a first crack at that. So trade-offs, when you think about the upgrades, you have the costs versus sustainability. So a building owner would have to weigh in the initial upfront cost to implement technologies versus the environmental savings, right? Then you have reliability versus intermittency, especially if you're thinking about renewable energy sources like solar power or offshore wind, for example. The reliability versus the supply is something that the grid operators would have to take into consideration. And then infrastructure upgrades versus operational disruption, right? Thinking about that more holistically, when we look to upgrade our infrastructure, there will be outages that could disrupt some of the operations of building performance if you have to upgrade your low capacity. Not Con Edison, we're planning on increasing electrification, right, due to decarbonization efforts at the city and state level, and making sure that we are able to allow customers to meet those demands or enable them to meet their own demands, right, as outlined and detailed in our clean energy commitment. And if we do it right at the building level, we can minimize the need for trade-offs as buildings decarbonize, right? An example would be if we really focus on smart building electrification, where you're not just installing a heat pump to replace a fossil fuel generated system, but you're also thinking and taking into consideration the building envelope so that you're right sizing that equipment. And then when you think about adding smart controls, then you're able to maximize the technology all across the board. So we provide incentives for our customers to bring down the cost of that installation so that they can install the most efficient equipment at their facilities. And with these efficient heat pumps, we're taking some strain off of the grid, right? As compared to the other energy intensive systems that, the legacy systems that may be installed right now. So if we get it right, we can minimize some of those trade-offs.
Thank you, Shaun. Anyone else want to chime in?
Well, let me chime in on I'll follow up on the resilience part of that equation that Shaun already mentioned. Of course, one of the challenges is as we go decarbonize our generation, go to more renewables like solar and offshore wind. Of course, one of the problems is these are intermittent sources, and the intermittency of those sources, the sun may go behind a cloud, the wind may stop blowing, unfortunately, and so that makes it a bit of a challenge for the grid operators, obviously, to maintain resilience of the supply as we go to very high penetration. And so this is one of the areas where we've been focusing a lot at Brookhaven because we recognize that we need storage. And storage of energy is going to be really important. It's kind of the replacement of peaking plants in a way for as you go to the renewables. You're going to have to make up for those, those times when the generation is slacking off. And so we're looking at storage, but it has to be on a very, very large scale. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about that and looking at strategies. one of the challenges is, well, the big technology in batteries is lithium ion. Unfortunately, if you Google the New York Times, if you search on the New York Times webpage for batteries, it's always about fires. That you've got these electric bike fires that have caused problems. And the issue there is, again, at Brookhaven, we think about some of the long-term fundamental challenges. The fundamental problem there is the electrolyte. A simple battery has a cathode, an anode, and an electrolyte. And that electrolyte in which the ions move so the electrons can go in the external circuit. In lithium, that can't be water. Because at the voltages that you'd use for lithium, the water would break down. You'd break water into hydrogen and oxygen, which is not a good idea. That's an explosive element. So you can't use water, and that's one of the challenges. The electrolytes, unfortunately, are flammable, and that's one of the big problems with lithium batteries. So it's hard to imagine scaling those up to the grid scale needs that we need. And so at Brookhaven, we're working on, well, what are other chemistries where you could use water as an electrolyte that would make a huge difference? And we're looking at that. And so instead of using lithium, we're looking at using materials like zinc. And zinc is also very abundant and environmentally friendly. So it has some advantages, but there are some technical issues. But that's a good example of what we consider the important use-inspired basic research. We're trying to figure out how we can make better zinc batteries that would be water-based so that we can scale that storage up to the level that's necessary for integration of renewables and helping with that resilience that Shaun was just talking about. And so we think there are, and we're demonstrating in the laboratory, there are some solutions that are very, very interesting. They be non-lithium, and they could be a part of our future. And so we think it's important to pursue those type of new chemistries for the grid challenge.
Thank you, James. So you were talking about the technology and the science in the materials that we're using, and then Shaun was talking about right sizing and some of the trade-offs there. So on that note, at what stage would you say in the building cycle should resilience and decarbonization be integrated into the design process? So how can architects and engineers collaborate to ensure that the new facilities are both energy resilient and sustainable from the outset?
I'll take that one. Kick off. And I already mentioned my purview is more existing building space. But when you get into the new construction space and the programs NYSERDA is offering, as early as possible, we offer incentives for our engineers and architects to consider things even pre-design. Like what are you going to have to take into account as you move forward? What are the other players? What are the incentives in the market? What is code saying? And how can you plan from the offset so that the project's successful? It's easier to do it early in a new construction space than certainly trying to modify existing buildings. And we've learned that repeatedly through projects we've done at NYSERDA. From a cost-effective money standpoint, as well as a logistics standpoint, the earlier you get in, the better. So we offer a lot of pre-early design assistance through our new construction program.
Thank you, Jaime. And continuing from, you said that you have a lot of experience with existing buildings. So, of course, many of our critical facilities, they exist today in New York City, New York State, and they have, legacy energy infrastructure that rely heavily on fossil fuels. So what are some of the strategies for decarbonizing or retrofitting those legacy systems while maintaining the resilience during the transition period?
Yeah, so for us, if you look at the hospital sector as an example, I think resiliency has always been top of mind for them for obvious reasons. From our standpoint, because of increasing recent climate events, we've been incorporating resiliency directly into our programs and sort of forcing and yet making sure people are thinking about that as they're making building upgrades and investment decisions. And certainly there are technologies out there. I'll go back to what Shaun said earlier. it is a trade-off of cost when it comes down to it. So if there's a project you want to do, in order to make it resilient, you're going to have to spend more money on it, probably protecting it from resiliency, relocating mechanical equipment, and that sort of thing. What we recommend at NYSERDA is a little bit of both. Look at what's been successful in the market, and we try and showcase our demonstration projects to the extent we can. But we also offer funding for entities to do planning of how to incorporate resiliency and decarbonization into your buildings, how to do that in a planned strategic manner that's cost effective, that you can do with your cash flow. And we also offer funding for someone who doesn't have an energy manager on site to help explore and take ownership of some of these ideas to join the team actually as an employee. We pay for the salary of them to join and help figure out what makes sense for those sites and how to tackle that.
Nice.
Yeah, if I could add, I think Jaime hit on a bunch of critical topics. It's really partnering with all stakeholders, because there's so many resources that are kind of scattered around different organizations that the end user could take advantage of. And speaking back to the point from the second question, it's definitely harder to retrofit, right? But about 60% of our building stock needs to be retrofitted with energy efficiency upgrades. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we face in our current times, with the multifamily market segment being the biggest challenge, because you have the dwelling units, you have tenants that live there, and we're trying to kind of disrupt that system to upgrade that building, right? But I think a key thing to point out here is that decarbonization doesn't need to all happen at once, right? Especially with buildings with complicated systems. And so like the NYSERDAs of the world, the Accelerator, the Con Eds, all these different organizations can help our customers take those incremental steps towards the decarbonization journey, so that by the time it's time to really, really have a deep retrofit, they'll be ready and able to accomplish that. But the decarbonization and resiliency should be incorporated at all stages of the building's life cycle. It doesn't only need to be undertaken as part of a major retrofit.
So
Great
let me
point. Go ahead.
let me also jump into this one because I'm very intrigued on the part of your question about strategies for decarbonizing. So when I look out over the horizon, something that I think would be really exciting, particularly in New York, a lot of the aging infrastructure in Manhattan is served by the Con Ed steam system, and if we could decarbonize the steam generation, boy, that to me is really exciting and an opportunity to have a major impact on decarbonization. Particularly, there's so much that's connected to the existing steam system in Con Edison. And if that could be decarbonized, there's a tremendous ripple effect on this one. Now, how to decarbonize it, that's an interesting challenge. And you could maybe electrify boilers, or you could replace the natural gas with something that's, more carbon friendly, like hydrogen. But boy, those are still fundamental research challenges. But in terms of I wanted to add a longer term strategy to the discussion.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
and James, just real quick to comment on that, I echo that. Our steam system runs from the tip of Manhattan down in the financial district up to 96th Street on the west side, and 89th Street rather, on the east side. So it's only in Manhattan. But we did put out our steam long range plan recently, last year, or the year before rather, and we have some initiatives that we're working on: low carbon fuels, some hydrogen. The second largest heat pump in the world is another proposal there. So we are looking to actively decarbonize our steam system. I couldn't agree with you more. It's a great opportunity for our largest commercial customers in New York City. It's about 1,700 or so steam customers that we have connected right now.
Great. So adding a little bit more, I would say, broader perspective, looking at global initiatives and just looking to see what other benchmarks are there. how do decarbonization and resilience strategies differ across regions with varying climates, energy infrastructure, and resources? And what can we learn from those global examples? How can we use those solutions and adapt them to our local context?
Well, let me start off this one because, being part of the DOE system, if you just look at other regions within the United States, I think there are lessons to be learned, but I think it's important to recognize that different regions of the country have really different problems.
Yeah.
And, for example, if you look on the West Coast, one of the big challenges, you have a lot of generation of electricity in Washington State and the Pacific Northwest, but the customer is in California. And so you've got long distance transmission problems. You've got to get that power from Washington State, several thousand miles south. And so that's a long distance transmission challenge. In the Midwest, there are an awful lot of coal plants still. In the Northeast, we are incredibly congested. We are congestion capital of the world. And we have local problems. So, the first thing we have to recognize is that all of these regions have different problems and different needs. But there are some global things that I think are common across all of them. And one which is not, but I'll just mention it because it's something I think about a lot. It's the as we build our new system, we have to make sure that we're building something that is also secure from a cyber point of view. Cyber attack, I think, and ransomware attacks are a real big threat broadly. And so that's something where, the national lab system, is working across the country. And that's a very common problem that comes in. But also, as I mentioned, energy storage is something that, there are different needs in energy storage depending on where you are. But in general, energy storage is something that is another common problem across these diverse ecosystems, electrical energy ecosystems in the country. And so there are ways to learn lessons and to collaborate in terms of how we store energy, but also how we use it to help balance some of the renewable generation. California is doing some very nice balancing right now between their solar generation and their energy storage. So there are lessons for us as we think about massive offshore wind.
Yeah, you talk about cybersecurity, which is another interesting aspect of resiliency, but we'll come back to that in the next question. Anyone else wants to chime in on using more regional or global strategies locally? So let's talk about the technology. So what are some of the examples of non-fossil fuel-based energy resilience solutions that can maintain critical operations during emergencies? I know you've been mentioning storage, for example, but how do these compare to the traditional solutions in terms of cost, reliability, and scalability?
Okay, well, I'll jump in again because I did put storage on the table. Cost is a problem, obviously. And in everything, we have to think about the ratepayer, of course. And so cost becomes a big issue, particularly with new technologies. And it takes, there are always the early adopters that will pay the extra price because they've got critical problems that they have to solve, no matter what the cost. But then as you scale up, of course, these things can come down. And so, new energy storage technologies, the current, the cheap lithium ion batteries that are out there are a result of consumer electronics that really drove this. It was, the consumer electronics industry that was the first adopter, and that led to this incredible ecosystem and a huge amount of investment to continue to reduce the costs and improve the density of those systems. We can anticipate such things. This is a challenge, but I'm also confident. If you look at microelectronics, you look at previous lithium ion solutions. as these get adopted, those costs always come down. Solar is another example. The cost of solar has come down. Wind has come down. Although cost right now is prohibitive, especially for new technologies, I think there is a path to adoption.
Great point. And I'm curious, NYSERDA, so Jaime or Shaun, like what role do you guys see yourselves playing, your groups playing in that cost going down over time?
So I think, from NYSERDA's standpoint, again, our funding primarily goes towards technical assistance type activities and helping people plan out long-term strategy. As Shaun mentioned, we are really promoting sort of a stepped sequence to electrification. It doesn't have to be all at once, which helps with the money and the upfront cost that this is going to require. We have some strategic demonstrations going on that will offer tranches of money. They're competitive, looking to demonstrate something that works in coordination with utility incentives like those that Con Ed offers. But really, the tried and true incentives are coming from Shaun and Con Edison these days on offering money to make those things happen. So,
yeah, speaking to that, I think between 2020 and 2025, we're at about $2.2 billion in financial incentives, and we're anticipating another $2.5 billion over the next 5 years to support a lot of this effort. Now, traditionally, it's been lighting, right? We're moving away from lighting again to smart building electrification measures. So a lot of emphasis on electrifying the heating systems, whether it's space heating or domestic hot water. And these incentives make a difference, right? Let's be honest. It all comes back to the money for customers. The byproduct, though, has been something that they're very excited about, having everything at their fingertips, right? Where it's 2025 almost, right? So we're embarking on a new journey where the cost of the technology is coming down because it's been around for some time. And if we are able to do it right and scale, then we'll continue to see those costs come down as new technologies come up to the forefront to solve some of our most critical challenges. But Jaime, you're right. We have financial incentives that have been helping our customers, and also with the financing. You heard Curtis Probst on the last part of this meeting, this event, speaking about the different financing mechanisms that he's pairing with Con Ed incentives so that customers can do the projects right now, right? Where otherwise maybe they're 10 years out, 15 years out, or maybe we'll never be able to afford a project of this scale. So continuing to work with all the different parties to enable our customers and empower them to meet them on their journey, because it's here now, right? We're a little bit actually behind, to be honest. So we have to continue to push forward.
Thank you, guys. As we continue to talk about adoption, cost, and scalability, with the increasing prevalence of decentralized energy systems, how can critical facilities leverage local renewable energy resources such as community solar, district energy systems to support resilience and decarbonization goals simultaneously?
These are tough questions, which is why you're getting us sort of.
I realize it.
I think storage, unlocking the storage thing is a big one that James already mentioned, and we are seeing more community solar from NYSERDA's standpoint too, doing a lot more promotion of that. Thermal networks is another one, getting people to join in on geothermal loop systems, so you're balancing your loads in the system and making that more effective and efficient for use. I think that there's we're in the early adopter stage, I guess, is lack of a better way to say it, particularly the New York City metropolitan area, where, historically there's always been, greater energy concerns, grid pockets, and trying to navigate converting systems over to electrification. With the resiliency component, we need to incorporate storage, renewable energy, low carbon alternative fuels, all of which is sort of, is it scalable, is a very, I guess, big question. And where we're at right now is we're trying to demonstrate these in, 5 or 6 areas across different sectors of the state, looking to showcase results that maybe we could determine, is it scalable and what would it take to scale it, sort of where we're at.
Makes sense. Kind of too early to tell. Still testing.
Well,
Got
part of my answer to this question is actually pushing ahead 2 questions when you talk about data. But I think it's a good time to introduce it. As you have decentralized capabilities, keeping the grid operating requires a lot more understanding of where demand is going to go, where generation is going to go, when you have to call upon storage. And this, to me, we're fortunately in an era, we're in the information age, and we're learning how to deal with larger and larger amounts of data. And so, I'm previewing question 9 coming up that you were talking about earlier that we were going to talk about. But it's really important that we have systems that incorporate, a lot more data into the operation, because we're going to have sensors telling us where demand is going. We're going to have sensors telling us, what is going to be expected, is, where there are clouds coming. We need to be prepared for that. We know that the wind is about to die down or the wind is about to pick up, and, digest all of that so that we know when to deploy the batteries, when to charge the batteries. And so data is, in my opinion, going to be an absolutely critical part of, the future grid. And also it offers, this massive data offers an opportunity to really improve resiliency and to do things potentially like Island for, with the microgrids and with decentralized generation. There might be a better opportunity to really island so that we can make a much more resilient grid when we have, either natural or man-made issues that are attacking the grid.
Thank you, James, and thanks for helping me to segue to data. Definitely the next topic here. So anybody else want to chime in? I will ask the question in this way. So what metrics should we use to assess not only the ability to provide power during an emergency, but also the ability for to look at emissions intensity, and that's of facilities who have critical infrastructure, have a need for resiliency. What metrics should we be using to look at the effectiveness in ensuring long-term sustainability? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not quite sure about metrics, but I think when you think about things like an emergency, like a hurricane has come through the area, we've known that to happen in New York.
Yes.
How do we make ourselves more resilient? And so for example, Brookhaven has been working with Con Edison on a project to think about how you can use weather information to do a better job of responding to emergencies. Where can you predict how can you predict with better spatial fidelity where there are going to be problems, where the lines are going to be down, where you should be deploying the repair crews, so that you can increase the efficiency. I don't have a metric in mind, but of how you measure this, but the ability to do better in the future is going to be a matter of more knowledge, better data about where exactly things are happening, better management of that data, and better use of that data to deploy the resources to respond to the emergency and to prepare. If you have fairly accurate predictions
Forecasting
with Doppler radar, for example, and where critical parts are going to cross the grid, it will help you to prepare for emergencies, pre-deploy crews in some of the areas where you think they're going to be needed, things like that. So it's kind of the metric is, I guess, how much not data are we going to be able to handle, and it's not really a metric. So but how are we going to be able to handle the data that's required to to improve our response to those emergencies.
Yes. And I think, like we've been saying, the technologies are getting smarter, right? A lot of smart technology, lots of sensors. So there is a lot of data. The industry is becoming data rich. So really figuring out how we can use that data and put it to use for responding and building more efficient and resilient systems. Thank you, James. All right. Let's transition a little bit to policy and regulation. So what role do policy and regulation play in aligning resilient solutions with decarbonization? Are there any existing or emerging regulatory frameworks encouraging the implementation of sustainable energy resilience?
Yeah, I mean, policy obviously has a direct impact on what we do every day. Everything is centered around a regulatory environment. It's important that we don't have a one-size-fits-all policy, as building structures are different, right? So when you have like the critical facilities, you have to make sure that you take that into consideration. But policy has the ability to impact meaningful change. I think my program director at Columbia University always says that the air today is cleaner than it was 70 years ago or so, right? 50 years ago, rather, since the Clean Air Act in 1970. And it's primarily because of the mandate for the catalytic converter and combustion engine vehicles and other policies that reduce the particulate matter in our air, right? So that's an example of how policy can enact meaningful change. So there are a number of ways that we could do that. Incentives and funding are definitely an example of how us at Con Edison, through our energy efficiency and building electrification programs, have been able to do that successfully and design our incentives for the market where they are. So we have our residential customers, which are 1 to 4 family units. We have multifamily, which are 5 units and above. Large commercial industrial make up the skyline of New York City, and then our small commercial customers that are the heartbeat of New York City. So the restaurants, bodegas, office space, small office spaces rather, fitness centers, restaurants, and the like. And each of them have a different structured incentive to meet those customers where they are. Another area where I see policy and mandate supporting is building codes and regulations, setting that standard a little bit higher to enable the energy efficiency or clean energy transition to really take shape and mold. For example, I mentioned earlier, since about 2009, the majority of our energy savings came from lighting measures. That was as of the energy efficiency portfolio standard, where the Joint Utilities of New York State took over the responsibility of the programs from NYSERDA, which was funded under the Systems Benefits Charge. Looking forward into the future, LED lighting will be baseline code, right? Baseline code requirements. So we're not going to incentivize that technology anymore, because every customer, every homeowner should have LEDs in their home as a requirement, which will allow us now to take those incentives and apply them to technologies that are a little bit harder to implement. Jamie mentioned thermal networks. One of the technologies that I'm excited about is wastewater heat recovery. There's intrinsic value in waste heat in New York City, right? And once we could tap into that, then when you think about resiliency, you think about thermal storage of these technologies, you think about the decarbonization of the building and the communities that are going to thrive as a result. Those are some of the things that, not necessarily through policy, but through program incentives and changes, we're able to incentivize now that wastewater heat recovery system for new construction projects, because your architects, your engineers aren't installing that as part of the business as usual for a new building. Right, so we're able to kind of move the needle there and set those standards and goals from where we sit at the utility in alignment with our city and state policy and goals, such as the CLCP and the Climate Act.
Thanks, Shaun.
Yeah, completely agree, Shaun. I think they play a huge role in making us meet our state goals, as well as goals for the country to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel. I think that there's been some movement, at least, Shaun, you mentioned Systems Benefits Charge and Energy Efficiency Portfolio Standard, sort of our next tranche of clean energy fund, if you will. We are injecting resiliency directly into that plan going forward. And while it's not exactly policy, it is sort of shaping how our funding will be used going forward and making sure that resiliency is something that's a piece of every project going forward.
Thank you, Jamie.
I wanted to add something from a slightly different perspective, and that is, I completely agree with everything Shaun and Jamie mentioned, but a somewhat different perspective is that a lot of, the grid is undergoing really remarkable transformation in a very short time. And it's going to require a lot of new technologies, quite frankly. We mentioned some of the new batteries that don't use lithium, for example. They're going to be, but that's just, an example. There are going to be new sensors, there are going to be new cyber security technologies, etc. And one of the challenges is, as you take technologies out of inventors, from universities or national labs, as you translate them up technology readiness levels, there's this so-called valley of death in the middle, which is a real problem for all technologies. It's particularly, I think, exacerbated in an industry that's highly regulated, because the risks are always higher. And so one of the challenges we have is, how do you take these great ideas, these great inventions, and make sure they get the demonstrations that are needed to prove them, so that, investors see that there's going to be a policy down the road so they can invest and make money on this in the long term. And this is where NYSERDA has played historically some terrific roles. And, we're really fortunate in New York to have NYSERDA, I must say, because they have recognized this for some time, and they've thought about this challenge. But I think the role of policy, in addition to, setting things like lighting standards, we have to, since we're going to be doing a lot of reinvention of the grid, we have to have a way to get new technologies over the valley of death. And so we need NYSERDA to continue to do some of the things they've done so well in the past to help those technologies make it into deployment.
Great point. All right, let's talk a little bit more about cost. It did come up. We talked about it a little bit, but when evaluating energy resilience solutions, how should the building owner account for the entire life cycle of the system, considering not only the initial cost, but also long-term maintenance, the energy savings, and the environmental impact? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they should do it, for starters. They don't all consider life cycle when they're making decisions, right? So, I mean, that the first part is to do a life cycle cost analysis in general, and not just look at the first upfront costs. And we particularly, suggest that when you're looking at various heat pumps, and if geothermal is something you can do from a life cycle cost perspective, it's going to be a better bet than air source heat pumps. So we do ask people, and again, something we promote in our Flex Tech Technical Assistance program is life cycle cost analysis that takes into account, what it's going to take to operate and maintain and replace the system in the future, what regulations might be in place in the future, what might rates look like in the future, both electric and natural gas, or even delivered fuels to some extent, and take all that into consideration and sort of do a risk analysis even around that.
Great point. And anybody else?
Well, just, Jamie's right on with this one. You've got to do the analysis. And, there's so many, it's every homeowner has an opportunity to think about this, but there's still a reluctance to, take the leap in some of these things, even though you see, it's going to pay itself off in a very short time. And from then on, it's all gravy. It's going to be money in your pocket, but people still don't do it. And I'm not sure if it's that they haven't done it, or they just don't want to make that initial leap and make that investment in the future. But, you've got to start by doing the analysis.
You guys think there's probably like an education gap there, or what do you think is the biggest barrier there to doing that life cycle cost analysis?
I think people, it might be helpful to, educate them that there are tools out there that could help them with this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are these life cycle tools that are readily available, but it's sort of like my daughters and I over the weekend, they showed me how to do iMovie over on my iPad, and something I just never bothered to learn, and you know, I think there's similar sorts of things. There's some sort of barriers we have to trying new things, even though they may be very convenient and easy to do. There's still a barrier.
Okay. Now, we've been seeing a lot of extreme, weather patterns and events as climate change leads. We see them more frequently. Are there specific lessons that we have learned from recent climate events? So when we talk about things like wildfires, floods, heat waves, how can building owners and municipalities prepare for and recover from those events without relying on fossil fuels?
So I'll jump in again. In addition to, so we've been looking at previous weather patterns and, trying to understand how we could have done better, with response to certain, specific storm events. And I guess I want to broaden the response to your question. I think there's a lot we can do with weather because we've got great weather tools now that give us a little bit more lead time. We've got amazing high resolution Doppler radars and things like that if we use properly can help us to do a better prediction of exactly, what's going to hit where. We get better at that. But I wanted to distinguish between weather and climate. And, I have colleagues that have been thinking about, what's New York City going to look like in 20, 40 years. And, the models, the climate models are suggesting, that the number of days above 90 degrees are going to continue to grow, sometimes dramatically. And we need to be thinking about some of the long term. Those heat waves are predicted to become more intense, and that's a major issue for Con Edison, and particularly the heat waves will. You're not going to have as much time to cool off overnight, which is has always been a part of the ability to deal with some of those heat waves. And so thinking about climate is, long-term, weather, you could think about what you've seen in the past and, using the information to make better predictions short-term. But thinking about climate changes and how that's going to lead to a fundamentally different system or put new stresses on the system in the decades to come is something we need to be thinking about and preparing for. If we have some of these horrible heat waves that some of the models are predicting, we've got to figure out how the hell we're going to live through that. It's going to be a challenge.
Agreed.
Yeah, James, those are solid points, and understanding the difference between the climate and the weather is something I think we take for granted. We had a good training module from Con Ed that was dispersed to all of our employees that they have to complete, and it really simplified it for those that are not in the sustainability space. And it states that the climate will tell you what to have in your closet, the weather will tell you what to wear that day, right? Which is a very simple way of explaining the difference. And at Con Ed, through our strategic planning group, we put out a climate change and vulnerability study that we could share resources with this group after which. But I mean, what we're looking at in the future is daunting. Historically, we have about 4 days of maximum temperatures. By 2050, we're looking at 32 of those days, right? Heat waves are going to rise from 2 to 9 by 2050, and a precipitation from 3 to 5, right? So we are up against the wall. And what we're trying to get the market to think about as these new technologies come onto our system, think about how they could be more resilient. Again, I have about 18 years in the company, electrician by training. So when you think about the major climate-related events, my first really big one was Hurricane Sandy, where we lost all the power. I was working at East River Generating Station. Some of my colleagues had to be escorted off by boat because the sea level rise, it rose so high that they couldn't get out of the station. From that point, we went into about $1 billion spend in storm hardening for the company for all of our critical infrastructure and facilities. As part of that effort, installing sump pumps, elevating equipment where we could, installing floodgates and the like. But this is something that customers now, if they live in an area where their building is subject to flooding, then they have to consider the storm hardening as well. And the tech providers that we're leaning on for advancement need to incorporate resiliency into the strategy as well, so that now we're future-proofing anything that we're installing today.
Excellent points. Great. Now we have you guys coming from different important sectors and different players in the market. So in this next section, we're going to talk a little bit about the cross-sector collaboration. How can the different sectors, public, private, and academic, collaborate to develop resilient and decarbonized solutions for critical infrastructure? What partnerships should be explored to enhance energy resilience in hospitals and schools and other critical facilities?
So I think I've got to jump in on this one. I think there's a tremendous opportunity. Over the last couple of years, we've, for example, had a growing relationship with folks at Con Edison. We are doing projects together. The national labs have, a lot of remarkable capabilities and a lot of work in energy systems. We are funded by the Department of Energy, and we do a lot of work on energy systems, thinking about grid, as well as future technologies like batteries. And we've been very pleased to have developed a relationship with Con Edison, along with other utilities, LIPA, NYPA, National Grid, and we really see the value of bringing people together and working together. We need the utilities. They own the problems. They know the problems, and we can potentially bring some new solutions that they weren't aware of. And we recently we've always worked with NYSERDA. NYSERDA has been a fantastic partner in many ways. And by all of us working together, I think we pull together the critical and team with diverse viewpoints that can look at these problems and start to address them because these are really tough problems that we're talking about, really hard, difficult problems. We need to bring together the best teams to do this, and it's going to require that the scientists and engineers of the national labs and Con Edison and the people at NYSERDA who are doing all sorts of analysis and setting policy work together on these really tough problems, like getting over the valley of death and translating these technologies. It's a good example where we all need to work together. And I see we're doing more and more of that. And I think I'm very excited about, continuing that for the future. It's a real opportunity for us to solve tough problems.
I agree with James wholeheartedly. Yeah.
I agree with James too. We love the national labs and we love NYSERDA.
Great partnership here. And let's not forget, I'm a designer at heart and always having the customer perspective. So how can communities be engaged in this transition, right, to energy resilience? And what role do we see the public awareness playing in driving the adoption of these solutions? So how do we engage the public and the community and help them be part of the solutioning?
Well, I'll give one example on it's sector specific, P12 schools program that we've been running now for a couple of years. In this past round incorporated, resiliency and extreme heat into the considerations of the projects. And schools by nature are more involved in community, community involvement in agreement of what they're doing naturally because of, taxes and all of that. But really presenting to the community what the role the school could play in during an extreme heat or power outage, and the school being open to the public, getting air conditioning in there if they switch over to heat pumps, and really it gets their buy-in on the projects that the schools are trying to move forward. So we found it to be a very very successful in that sector, in that area.
Great example. Any other comments from you guys?
Yeah, just real quick with our utility thermal energy networks team. I know they're canvassing for participants out in Mount Vernon to get the community to be part of the project and see if that pilot could be successful so that we could scale. And then additionally, we host a number of events. We host 2 decarbonization summits annually through my section, include Chrissy's team and a bunch of our teams from the customer clean energy programs, where we unite the entire market, customers, manufacturers, financiers, industry professional organizations, to really come together and connect on how we could solve these critical issues together. So the community engagement piece is definitely at the center, as they're our customer and we can't do it without them.
Great points.
One final comment I'd add to it, again from a slightly different perspective. One of the challenges that we all face is, are we going to have the right future workforce? And this is a real critical issue. We see, we need people that really bring a diverse perspective to solving these problems. It's not necessarily just an electrical engineer anymore. That person has to be a data scientist. That, for example, you need a really new, highly educated workforce to make this, to rebuild the grid of the future. And part of what Brookhaven does and other institutions, other national labs, but we're heavily engaged with the New York region in outreach and education programs. We've got to inspire the next generation of young people to embrace these problems and want to make careers in this. And so and we need them from with really diverse backgrounds. And so we spend a fair bit of our effort, working on that future workforce and education and outreach to those communities.
Yes, very important point. All right, I think a couple more, and then we can open it up to some of the questions I see in the chat. But as we solve what the industry likes to term wicked problems, right? These really big, complex problems of resiliency and decarbonization. How can we ensure that the energy resilience solutions and decarbonization efforts are equitable, especially in underserved or vulnerable communities? What role do social equity and accessibility play in the design and implementation of these solutions?
Yeah, I was itching to jump in after James's last comment. So thank you for teeing me up, James. The workforce is where it's at. And we're fortunate enough in early January in 2020, we co-founded with Willdan Energy Solutions, the Clean Energy Academy, which is focused on just that, right? How do we enable a workforce that is able to meet us on this journey for the clean energy transition? And I am happy to report that we just had our end of year graduation late last month, and we have exceeded 1,000 graduates to date, of which 70% of the individuals reside in priority populations. That's formerly incarcerated or returning individuals, that's previously homeless, that's people with disabilities, that's veterans, and others that come from disadvantaged communities are graduates of that program. 70% come from that range. And as much in thanks to NYSERDA as well, because we're accessing the partnership and leveraging funding from their PONs, or Program Opportunity Notices. 3981 is the primary driver of this one, which is Clean Energy Technology Training. So we just received an additional funding for load methodologies and savings calculations for heat pump technologies that we're going to roll out very soon. And we're excited about the future, right? The kids are excited about the future. The career transition is excited about their future as well. About 50% of the individuals looking for job placements are placed with jobs within the companies or upskilling so that they can get promoted within their same field. So that's one area that we're looking at it from a social equity lens. Another thing that I'm doing, James, with part of your team, is with the Department of Energy's Buildings Upgrade Prize, partnering again with Urban Green Council right here in New York City, and then Riseborough, which is a property management firm for low to moderate income customers. We have just received, if this is not public news, you heard it here first, but we just received our second award for funding that we're looking at the adoption of heat pump water heaters for customers that reside within the Justice 40 census tract. So essentially customers that otherwise may not have been able to afford a heat pump water heater in their home, we're catalyzing what that could look like. And we just brought on Mitsubishi as the manufacturer of a new product. It's Altera. It's not new, but again, when you think about the tech advancement network that I'm leading here, it's widely adopted in Europe, right? And they're bringing it to this market now, January 2025, and we've been able to work with them to see if we can install this in a couple of facilities that Riceboro operates. So again, environmental justice sort of lens, social equity sort of lens, and how we could work together through that partnership model to enact meaningful change.
Thank you, Shaun. All right, this last one before we open up to the audience, it's in regards to what are the next steps or the key steps that building owners, researchers, and developers, policymakers should take in developing long-term strategy that integrates both decarbonization goals and resiliency goals. How can these strategies evolve over time as the technology advances and new climate challenges arise? And in this discussion, you guys shared a lot about things like data, NYSERDA, and NYSERDA's engagement of the schools. But what else do you guys have to say on what the strategy should be, what the next step should be, the long-term strategies should be?
Well, I want to follow up on what I said earlier about the importance of data. We are reinventing the grid, and I see data as becoming a really, really critical part of it. Yeah, I've seen this in science. Physics and chemistry has changed from when I was in graduate school in that we are dealing with massive data sets, and we've got to be able to develop new tools to help us understand and extract information from all that data. We're exploring, for example, the use of AI, and although you have to be careful, you could really do a lot of good with AI if applied properly to deal particularly with massive data sets. And so I think data is central, and that has associated with it both an opportunity like, massive data using AI to help you deal with that, but also risk, and that's the cybersecurity that I mentioned earlier. So right. I think recognition, to me, one of the more important things is recognition of the fact that it is changing. It's changing in a way that's going to be more data intensive, and we have to be prepared for both the opportunity and the risk associated with that.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, I would just say I think it comes down to planning and acknowledging that, like James said, and building in more touch points in strategy or plans that are being put in place so that something isn't locked in for 10 years and not being re-examined again. So
dynamic plans, I like that. Any last comments on that, Shaun, before we transition to the audience comments?
Yeah, I just think we need to be on the same page, right? It's probably the hardest part.
Good points. Okay, so coming from the audience, are there any active projects or pilot projects where energy is generated, stored in batteries, and then transported to the grid, similar to the V2G setup? Or do you see this as a today versus a future possibility to connect energy generation sources from locations that were not previously considered because of relative distance or grid connection?
So there are certainly examples where batteries are existing on the grid, and that has been, they've been around for a while. But I'll give an example that I'm particularly interested in that involves a New York company called Urban Electric Power, which is using a non-lithium technology to run a data center. This happens to be in California. But it is to me a good example. Data centers are massive power hogs. It was one of our challenges, microelectronics, and especially with the advent of AI and Chat GPT. We're using more and more electricity for computation, and it's a problem. I'll give that as an example. This company is using a flow assist battery technology that I think is really exciting, and it's on the grid. It's happening right now. So I think that to me is a leading edge of what I see is happening more and more. And in fact, I'm hoping to test one of those batteries at Brookhaven for LIPA in the near future. We've got a proposal to do that at a 10 megawatt hour kind of scale, which is, it's getting real, and that kind of capability has real opportunities. The interesting thing about that discussion is, it was a combination of the battery, Brookhaven, plus LIPA. And, I was really interested in the questions that the LIPA people had, because they're the ones that have to adopt it. And, given that it was an aqueous battery, they didn't ask any questions about safety. They'd say, yeah, it's aqueous, that's great. And they were more interested in things like synchronization. And so, it's really getting down to the nitty gritty of what the utilities need to know to deploy these technologies. So it's out there, it's happening, and I'm hoping it's going to happen. I see this happening more and more.
Thank you, James. I want to thank you guys for joining the panel today. It was a very insightful and engaging conversation, and I will hand it back to Deborah.